Right, shall we start? Yes. Okay. Welcome to our virtual geography speaker series. This is our 8th time already, and I think we're doing very, very well. Today, my name is Chaya. I'm your moderator today. And today we have Dr. Marion Borderon from Department of Geography and Regional Research, Faculty of Earth Science, Geography and Astronomy, University of Vienna. Today she will be presenting us a title entitled Conceptual and Methodological Challenges in Understanding Patterns of Immobilities in a Changing Climate, Insights from Ethiopia and India. Okay, so let me just give you a brief introduction to Dr. Borderon. So she holds her PhD in geography from Aix-Marseille University from France, and she was doing her research on malaria in Senegal. Currently, she's contributing to the development of concepts and methods for spatial assessment of vulnerability and risk in the context of environmental transformation. She has experience in population-based surveys and data analysis in Congo, Senegal, India, and Algeria. And she's also been doing some research on environmental and climate change in relation to migration. So I would like to have Dr. Marion Borderon here with us. And now the floor is yours, please, Borderon.
Thank you very much, Shaya. And I would say good evening. Perhaps it's the afternoon here, but I guess for most of you, it's already the evening. So I'm very happy to be here, and I might share my screen while talking to you. Where is it? Sorry, just trying to find where's the here. Great. So you can see my screen, full screen, the first slide.
Looks fine.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So yeah, and thanks for the invitation. So as you have heard, so I am based at the University of Vienna in Austria. So Austria is a lovely country in the southern part of Central Europe. And I've been working for quite some time now, for the last 6 years. And I have mainly been working the last years in this topic on the nexus between climate change, environmental change, and migration. So that's what I would like to exchange with you today, and where the journey might lead us to, and to do so, to discuss this different aspect of working in this topic. I would like to take the opportunity to share some insights from both case studies that I've been working on with my team. One is in Ethiopia, so we will look a little bit more into details about the place where the case studies have been conducted. So it's in East Hararge, in the southeast of Ethiopia. And we'll also take some time to discuss other type of aspects of the topic that I encountered while working in West Bengal in India. So I guess, and I hope that some aspects of this work will resonate with some of the previous presentations you might have, and will also make sense to you all. And I am looking forward to the Q&A sessions with you. So let's start a little bit more generally, looking at the overall context. So we have two big topics, right? On one hand, we have this environmental change or climate change. And on the other hand, the migration studies, the migration part. And perhaps just to clarify one thing, because you will see during the presentation, sometime I talk about environmental change, sometime I mention climate change. So to clarify a little bit why I use both terms. I have the tendency to talk about environmental change more than just climate change, more because I see climate change as a subset of environmental changes. And of course, what matters for us is to understand what's climate change. So the implication of climate change in the sense of, I think you're familiar with this, that the very rapid climatic change since the last century. So this so-called human-induced climate change leads to more extreme events, to change of rainfall patterns, an increase in temperatures globally, and so on. But then in my work, more as a human geographer, I have the tendency to look at different type of environmental change without looking into details if this environmental change can be directly attributed to climate change or not. So we cover all the types of changes and try to understand what does it mean for human settlements, for population dynamics. That's one of the clarification of the vocabulary. And one aspect, if you look at the last year IPCC reports, there were new ones this year and last year, but also a few years ago. There is this aspect that we have a very consensus or general agreement that environmental change impact human migration patterns, but how it impacts and who, where is still, there are still some unknown dimension, and that's what will interest us today. So if you look a little bit like these big questions, so what does it mean, climate change for human settlements? What does it mean now, but what could be expected? What will be the future? If you look a little bit at different, for example, messages you find in the media, also in some articles, sometimes you have perhaps a blurry messages or contradictory messages. But I took, for example, now 2 years ago, there was a series in the New York Times magazine, so let's say a respected outlet, newspaper, and it was named The Great Climate Migration Has Begun. And there was a very nice infographics showing that today 1% of the world is a barely livable hot zone. So you see a little bit the red hotspot on the graph, and it was mentioned by 2070, and it's backed up by some scientific publications. It is said that that portion could go up to 19%. And one of the key questions in this news article was where where do they go? These people that call this place, like in red, land. And that's probably something we could have in mind, that the connection between saying, okay, these places might be more affected by heat waves, for example, by an increase in temperature. I think at the moment you have all read the news in, for example, in India, in Pakistan, the fact that so the temperatures are very high. There are in some places it has reached the threshold of 50 degrees in the shade. But the question is a little bit, does that mean that the people living in these places will migrate? Should we expect mass migration those environmental changes result in more migration, or less, how people cope basically with these changing conditions. And I'm sure in former presentations, you already have the answer that it's far more complex than this. It is far more complex than, okay, environmental condition changes in some places that would lead to migration. People will have to leave. So you have a little bit this aspect, so where this newspaper, for example, so this series from the New York Times could fall, which is the maximalist or alarmist approach. So that's where you read these titles. Okay, climate change would cause movement of population. We could see mass migration movement due to environmental change, due to the climatic event. Yeah, a big rise in migrant flow. I won't go back into the history, but this is not, so we have been into some of this discussion for almost 40 years now. So one of the first environmentalist, Norman Maier, in the 80s was already mentioning that some places would be more exposed to environmental change, and that would lead to more migration. On the other hand, also since the last decades, there is another strand in the field called more the minimalist and skeptical approach, saying, no, wait, it's a little bit more complicated. We have limited evidence that migration so environmental change is a direct driver leading to more migration. That we see in other places that despite change in, or for example, more disasters or change in the environmental conditions, there are a lot of people who do not want to migrate. Some people might not be able to, and so on. So there are other factors playing here. And also this idea here that migration could also be considered as a successful climate adaptation strategy. And that's exactly where I will be located, more in the so-called pragmatic stance. So slightly more on the right here, but also on the idea to say, let's just have a look. What can we observe? Let's be pragmatic, let's be empirical, let's find evidence at the local level, what's happening and what can we observe. So my presentation will be basically slightly divided in 3 parts, but you will see the part A and B will be quite fast. It's really just to give also a little bit of the context into what exactly are my conceptual and methodological challenges I want to discuss with you. And then we will take most of the time for the case studies and sharing the insights from the two studies. So as a recap, we could say mass migration is not backed up by scientific evidence. So we have said it's far more complex, and migration anyway, independent of environmental change, is a normal aspect of life. It's multi-causal, it's complex. There are a lot of factors, a lot of determinants that could lead to an individual to decide to migrate or not. We could also think about the different motives. So migration could be for marriage, for job seeking, and so on. There are a lot of reasons for migration. There is a lot of way to migrate. It could be long term, it could be short term, it could be long distance, short distance, and so on. It could be seasonal. So we see there is also a lot of variations, and the definition of migration could vary according to the different studies, for example, that we could read. One of the aspects also is, we have seen it in the slide before, migration can be used as a coping strategy. For example, using remittances could be a way to reinvest in the place of origin, and so on. And one aspect that interests us particularly for the 2 cases I will discuss with you is the fact that by looking for a long time, as the researchers have focused on understanding the determinants of migration and the determinants of human mobilities, they might have overlooked the reasons why people stay immobile. Because being immobile was considered as a static, a non-event, something that's not particularly interesting. And this has changed on the theoretical perspective. And now there is this idea that we should not neglect the causes and consequences of immobility, but we should understand them better. And that could help us also to understand if some people might be trapped, for example, that they might be in need, for example, of help because they would be trapped in an environment that could hamper their livelihood and so on, for example, and could trap them into poverty. So that is also on the policy level, something that matters for us. We need to understand better the different situation. But from a methodological perspective, trying to understand this mobility, for example, at the local level, because we could say climate change is a global phenomenon, but it is felt at the local level. So it matters for the populations to understand what's going on at this level. The problem we have, it's quantitative data remains quite scarce. Migration is a little bit like the poor parent in the demographic part. If you consider fertility, mortality, health, and migration is usually the component that is not so easy to quantify at the local level or at the subnational level. So that's where I will skip a bit this, that just let me come back afterward to this slide. So it's where there are some gaps, right? Is this macro level, trying to understand at the subnational level what's going on the empirical way, trying to have a bit more data, a bit more knowledge at this level. And a few years ago with the team here, we did a review of the literature, mainly in Africa. And one of the conclusions we had is that we have quite very interesting studies, more at the global level, telling us a little bit what are the different trends, patterns. And at the local level, it's usually more qualitative research. That's very interesting to unravel the complexity, to understand a little bit what's going on. But the problem is usually the samplings are quite limited. And then it's a little bit more difficult to generalize or to understand if that touches a lot of people, the full population or not. So when you come back to this heuristic framework, which is now available, globally acknowledged as the framework to understand the different drivers of migration and the influence of environmental change on those drivers. If you really want to have enough data to cover these different aspects, for example, the demographic characteristics, but also for example, perhaps some political information and so on. Yeah, if you want to do it in a quantitative manner, it's quite a challenge because of the scarcity of the data. So that's what we are struggling a little bit with, trying to find comparable disaggregated data to do this. And that's make me come to this objective, and the overarching contribution of my work is trying to bridge the gap here and trying to find subnational data to unravel this complexity. And as you see a little bit how it is written in the slide, so to chart a bit of a middle path between this more global level analysis of migration drivers and in-depth ethnographic study. Of course, in the future, I could also imagine that mixed method approach would be particularly good to use in this kind of context. So that's exactly where I am located, and it's what I will present now going into the case studies. So it's where did I find this subnational data how did I work on it with my team? Did we combine this data with more environmental indicators and so on? So that's the aspect. So the first case studies. Now let's go a bit more into details. So I said, it's taking place in Kersa in East Hararghe. And you see, I just jump back, that for me, I think doing empirical work, it's a collective endeavor. And I've been working with at least 2 other teams out of the team here in Vienna. So a team of mathematicians and demographer based in France, and my colleague in Ethiopia with his team, so from Haramaya University. And I think that that's very fruitful collaboration to be different disciplines, so covering different angles of the topic. And what has been a little bit the stories behind this Ethiopian case studies is that a few years ago, I went to Ethiopia for the first time, so probably 4 years ago. And during this trip, I had the chance to meet my colleague, so Dr. Nega Asefa. And at this time, he was the director of a surveillance system called KERSA, Health and Demographic Surveillance System. So we could say HDSS, it will be a bit faster. And HDSS, as some of you might know, are routinely collected some data on some demographic and health variables. So information on some population. And you have about more than 40 HDSS sites over the globe. So you have quite some in Asia, and quite also a lot in Africa mainly. And the good thing is you have some information on the migration component. So this KERSA Center started in 2007 and has been working since. So we have now, let's say, more than 15 years of data. And it's like exhaustively investigated people who are in these 12 KBLAs. So the KBLA is it's a very, the thinnest administrative level. So yeah, just one aspect. So we are very local. And to give you a little bit of an indication, it's about 25,000 households that are under surveillance. So 25,000 households under surveillance, that's mean about 150,000 people that are monitored, meaning, for example, that we know when they have done so-called out migration. So that will be what we will be using, the information about, so the so-called out migration event, when people leave the surveillance system, and for what reason, and so on. And of course, this is great, but in the same time, it always no data are perfect. And an out migration event is defined by having left the place, so the residence, for more than 6 months. So for example, seasonal migration under 6 months won't be considered. So we have to be also aware of what kind of mobility do we capture. One aspect that interested us is also that in KERSA, it's a very rural, very agricultural place, and it's very prone to drought. And in 2015, there was a massive drought event in Ethiopia, and that's also particularly affected this region in East Hararghe. So we thought it would be a good opportunity for us to, because we have this time series, to monitor if migration pattern has changed in 2015 or the year after, for example, compared to the normal years. Can we observe a change in migration pattern? So that's a little bit the question we had. The first what are the determinants of individual mobility in Kersa, so this drone-prone area of Ethiopia. So can we understand a little bit better what drives the migration here? And so looking at this drought event, we could also understand a bit better. And another aspect that I've not yet highlighted in my speech is this involuntary immobility. You remember I said we are globally in the research field, we have the tendency to overlook immobility and trapped population. And there is quite some studies now on the topic, but most of them are qualitative, which it's absolutely not. It's also very important. But we thought it would be great to also look at this topic on the quantitative manner. Could we observe with this kind of data what we could name a risk of involuntary immobility? Are some people that might be at risk of staying immobile even during, for example, drought event that could lead to food insecurity, shortage of some natural resources, and so on. So that's one aspect we questioned. And to do so, we also use this quite known conceptual framework in migration studies, which is from you have perhaps three key names to have. So Shewell, Einders, and also Carling, that I have not mentioned here in the publication, but who also is behind this aspirations capabilities framework. So why this framework? This framework because so Carling and De Haas, Shewell, they define migration as a sort of an interaction, let's say, between the capability to do, the capability to migrate, and the wish to do it, so the aspiration. So typically, you could also have people who do not aspire particularly to migrate, who are pleased to stay for different reasons. Imagine place attachment. They have built the life there and they are happy to stay. And of course, along this continuum of aspiration, you could have another axis, which is, do I have the capacity? Or here, using the term of Amartya Sen, so a little bit this capable plus able, so this capability. So do we have the resources to do? So financial resources, but also perhaps physical resources or health that allowed you to travel or to migrate and so on. So, and if you aspire to migrate and you're capable of doing it, you are here, for example, in this typology in the mobility part. Of course, it's a very simplistic typology, and you could imagine that along, for example, a lifetime, an individual would have a certain trajectory and would not always be in the same category. Of course, the aspiration is also not completely independent with the capability. If you, if you really cannot, you are not able to migrate, that could also affect typically your wish to do it and so on. But here, it's where we are. What interests us would be the people who aspire to migrate, who would like to move out, but they cannot. So then they might be here at the risk of being involuntarily mobile. So that's why we use this framework. So we come back with our data. I have said these different figures. So we build basically a longitudinal data set. That's perhaps one thing to keep in mind. So you see the population is quite smaller compared to the population I mentioned, which is under surveillance, because we looked only on the 12 units, the 12 kBLE, so this environmental feature that have been under surveillance for the full time. Because the site has changed in 2014 because of more fundings, they enlarged the surveillance site. But then you know, the time frame is a bit different. So then we also considered only the people who are 13 years and plus, because we considered that looking at the migration of, for example, children under 13 would be a little bit different. Children would so the migration reason for children would be more, of course, depending on the family, the parents, and we thought it's a different decision process. So we wanted to look at more young adults and adults. So our data set is built per person semester, because the surveillance system is updated every 6 months. So that's what we have. And that's one aspect. And if you look at a bit the macro level, just looking at, sorry for the resolution, it's not so nice. I think sometimes this R and PowerPoint are, yeah, not working the best. We had a little bit of information already that, okay, in 2015, you remember we were discussing about this large-scale drought, really less rain, mainly between June and September, which is the most important rainy season in this place of Ethiopia. It's called the Kiremt rains. And it's really where all agricultural activities take place. So it really affects a lot of the agricultural related livelihoods. And 2016, so just the year after, it comes back a little bit to more or less to the average of about 500 millimeter. What we could observe is that is the out migration rate. It's like it's continuously increasing until it at least it's reached a peak in 2014, and then it massively decreased in 2015. So it would be difficult out of this graph to make any discussion. I mean, to make any correlation. But we say, okay, it's not so obvious, but perhaps something is happening here. And then we can go a little bit more into details, at least at the individual and the household level. So that's one of the aspects. So let's see what kind of data we have and what kind of variables do we have to be able to question the determinants of mobility. So as I said, the migrants is established for, sorry, I'm just checking a bit the time. So it's this 6 month part, 30 years old and plus, that's what we have been looking at. And we have been selected 3 different type of variables at 3 different levels. So at the individual level, at the household, and at the community level. So the community level, it's mainly where we looked at some environmental dimension to understand a little bit more how the environment could potentially influence the migration decision process. And 2 dimensions are important that we will look at them a little bit more into details. It's at the household level. In this data, we have information, so we recreate the 2 axes of our conceptual framework. So these capabilities, capabilities to migrate or not, and satisfaction with life condition is some information we had in the CASA data. So it's not directly related, so it's a proxy for aspiration. We agree being satisfied with your living conditions doesn't mean that you aspire to migrate or not. But as looking at the literature, there are strong connections between satisfaction and aspiration. And the hypothesis we made was, if you're very insatisfied with your living condition, that might be implicitly put you into the category of that you could have wished, for example, you could have aspired to something else, including migration, and then that's something that we try to recreate. So looking at this a bit multidimensional index that we created, so with the capabilities and the satisfaction with our household. So we now can look at all our households a little bit, how they spread into these different axes. And we could imagine, we could look, okay, low capabilities, for example, low satisfaction. We could make the assumption that this group, mainly the group in black, could cover basically these segments of population that are at risk of being involuntarily immobile. They do not have the capacity to migrate, and they don't seem to be very satisfied. So at the household level, that's some first exploration we did to question this. I don't want to enter too much into detail with you, but we looked in the data description in a lot of different dimensions to really understand who are our migrants, what the difference between the men and women. And you will see all the models we did are gendered differentiated, because the migration patterns are very gendered. So the woman mobility is mainly explained by marriage in this place. The men is mainly explained by job seeking, so the main reason, and so on. So we always looked a little bit the difference between the gender. One aspect I just picked up this graph as an example of basic descriptive analysis, that you see that in general, the migrants, they tend to be far more literate. It's even more, it holds even more for the man, and then for the woman. But for both gender anyway, compared to the non-migrant, the migrants are always more literate. So nothing so surprising here. It's very aligned with the literature. We also looked a little bit into details per gender, if there are some different patterns between the drought event, so 2015, 1 year after the drought, because we could imagine that the disruption for a large-scale event is not just 1 year, but that could also affect probably the year after, compared to all the other years that are where there is no specific environmental disruption. And I mean, it's a bit complicated to read table, and also sorry for the resolution, but just take one example. So if you look at the literacy, as we were, we just saw the graph, it is also interesting to notice that, for example, in total, so on average, every year it's more the literate. We have seen it like 50% of the migrants are literate. But what is very interesting is, like, if you look at the individual that have migrated during the drought event, it goes up to 64, almost 65%. So this proportion tends to change during the drought, and even more just in post-drought event. So it's more the literate. We did the same with the men. It's really this univariate bivariate analysis to try to understand the different relationship between the variables and what we could keep for a little bit more complex model. And that we come up to our models. So we run 4 models. So 2 time event history models, one for men, one for women, for all migration motifs. So a global model for any types of migration. And then we run, so we fit 2 specific models, one for only marriage migration and women, and one for labor migration for men. So here they are, and I suggest we perhaps jump directly to a little bit what we extracted from them. That will be a little bit easier to read. So what you see, it's highlighted in green and red. That's the coefficient and how, for example, the capabilities, they have the tendency to increase. So they are related to increase the migration. On the other side, for example, we could see the interaction between satisfaction and capability is negative. So we analyzed all these different models per gender. We look at the other two models, so the labor migration for men, marriage migration for women. And at the end, that's mainly also looking, so it's multi-level modeling. So you find again the individual variables, the household variables, and the community level variables. And then that helped us really to understand the three aspects that we wanted to question. What is the role of capabilities and satisfaction? And trying to understand this risk of immobility. And of course, all the environmental dimension. You know, how our environmental features influence the determinants of mobility. So that's what we extracted from this event history model. So in a way, what's just so in a nutshell, we realized that what is interesting is the large-scale drought had negative effect on the mobility, but at least in our model, it was only significant for women. And was not particularly significant for men. So drought event impacted women's mobility more than men. But the year following the drought, so in a post-drought situation, fewer men engaged in labor migration. So we could make the assumption that the drought eroded the livelihood of the population, and some households might not have had the capacity then to engage into migration, into labor migration, for example. So we find a bit the contrary of this general idea that environmental, like slow onset event could lead to more migration. In this case, it's more the contrary. So slow onset events like drought event leads a bit more to immobility in a way. And looking at the different exploration we did, we could also say that analyzing this type of data and applying exploratory data analysis could help us to understand which group and which segment of the population might be more at risk of being involuntarily immobile. So who you remember, it's our Black group, for example, here, that could, this exploratory data analysis could allow us to get some details about who could be struggling with adaptive measures, in situ adaptive measure. One aspect also that we found in these models is that the inhabitants of the so-called irrigated midlands, so it's some population living in midlands, but they have an irrigation system. They are generally more satisfied with their living conditions and also tend to be less mobile, especially men. But what we could imagine is that they're less mobile because they don't need to, because they have more agricultural possibilities, and that shows that in situ adaptation, or having more, of course, possibility to sustain a livelihood, leads also to a form of immobility, but I would say which is in this case a healthy immobility. So that's for our first example. And one of the conclusions also is that this HDSS data are quite interesting. And as we know that there are a couple of other sites so globally, that could be something to keep in mind when we want to study the interactions between social, demographic, and environmental component. Okay, I think I will skip this. It was just saying that this type of data could also be good to apply machine learning. It's a bit trendy at the moment also in the migration field, because when you have complex data sets lot of variables that are so-called collinear machine learning methods, such as random forest, or that they could be interesting to use. They could perhaps help to overcome some issues you could have with more classic demographic models. So that's one of the aspects. I hope you're still there. I always find it very hard to listen to someone for such a long time. But yeah, so I will be far faster for the Indian case study. So
I remind you, you have about maybe 10-15 minutes.
Yeah, I guess it's, yeah, I'm probably 5-10 minutes and we'll be here. So why I've chosen also this case that I wanted to talk to you, it's a little bit because in Kesa, in Ethiopia, we had the chance to have this data set. And sometimes you are in places where you don't have, and but you still want to do. I mean, you could say these communities here, there are some very important aspect going on, and like in Malda, in this place in West Bengal, there is a lot of displacement due to the riverbank erosion. So when we got the project and money to do research there, we faced the difficulty to say, yeah, but we don't have any data. We don't know who is where. We don't know who is displaced. Where are the communities? And some data available in the very so statistical office at the local level, but it's a little bit sparse and it's not always updated. So there's a little bit this question that sometime you could face, which is, but what do you do if you want to? So you have then to collect your primary data when the population is out of sight. So it's what we did a couple of years ago, and it was a little bit of an experiment. So this I did with my former team based in Salzburg, in geoinformatics. And then we organized and trained a team, a local team of surveyors to do a GPS survey. And the idea was to provide some, what I've named here, missing data. It was to help having enough data to do to offer to my other colleagues, the Indian colleagues that wanted to collect more in-depth questionnaire survey, to give them the opportunity to have a sampling frame, to know where to collect, where to carry out the questionnaire survey. Also in a way that they do not have to have this problem of not being able to randomize the sampling, and then knowing a little bit better the percentage of displaced household, non-displaced household, and so on. So that's what we did. And we this GPS survey covered 4,000, a bit more than 4,000 households, and the full population that interested us was about 4 times bigger, so 16,000 household. And that's a little bit how the results look like. So we created a sort of timeline of displacement after having collected all the GPS information. And that helps us a little bit more to understand where who are the communities that have never been displaced, the ones who have been displaced due to this riverbank erosion. Where did they go? How many times have they been displaced? For which reason, and so on. And one of the aspects which I think is quite interesting that you could like is like most of the people who have been displaced have the tendency to relocate very close to the river, and also in places that are exposed to erosion or other issues. And here, so in a way here, I would say they are displaced, that there is a sense of immobility, but in a way it's very, very close to this involuntary immobility, because immobility in the sense of they stay very close. They are a little bit trapped in this in this livelihood, because their livelihood, you see, depends on the river. And that's when we interviewed some of the participants. That's one aspect that was highlighted. Um, if at first, if they said, okay, we changed, the community changed the livelihood and we do something else, so we turn our back on the river, it was a disadvantage. Some have done it, and that they, for example, invested in some of the men went to for example, Delhi. So like you had a lot of seasonal migrations to work in construction sites and so on. So it's really a trade-off between the risk. So taking the risk to change the livelihood or to keep the same livelihood and managing to have a sustainable way of life. This aspect comes up in perhaps one part is sometimes looking at the mobility of individuals could be limited to understand the influence of, for example, environmental change. What matters perhaps more, and one that could be, it's a livelihood trajectories, how livelihood evolves. And I think by understanding the livelihood trajectories, then I think we will understand the mobilities of the population, or what do they mean. So that's that was a bit more shorter, but really just to understand also how as a researcher you could come to let's say to create, so to not just use secondary data, but to harvest your own data and to do primary data collection. So of course, it's a preliminary work that could bring different type of perspectives, and I think they are also, for example, in some places, like in some fields, like the humanitarian field, there are very advanced technique also to collect data in uncertain context, or in context that's not so easy to reach, for example, or like in that could be sensitive. And one also of the work that means a lot for me, it's this idea also to be able to give a voice to everyone, in the way that data are also very inequally shared, but inequally produced globally. And that's also important to be able to understand what type of knowledge we produce by doing what on whom and so on. So having a bit more this idea of what do we make visible, what remains invisible, and what does it mean, I think matters a lot. Yes, and perhaps the final word from my side, which is in a way I would say quite obvious. It's really, but it still matters. I mean, so much. So looking at again the IPCC and what is key there is like climate change is probably the biggest challenge of the century, or let's say even of the humanity. And I guess I'm mainly working, as you have seen, on the climate change adaptation, on the understanding of, so looking at how people use migration, or how they could use, or what does it mean at the local level. So not so much on the so-called mitigation aspects, what we could do to, or what the communities, what the governance can do to promote sustainable livelihood, to avoid destroying biodiversity, keeping this idea of having a healthy planet. And I think this is very crucial in the research also, is to really link mitigation and adaptation, because I think it is fundamental that we also understand better how these livelihoods can be sustained, how people's agency can be respected, meaning that everybody could have the choice to stay, to live, and also to maintain a sustainable way of life. Thank you very much. And I'm very glad to hear your comments or questions. Feel free.
Thank you so much, Marion. This has been a wonderful 1 hour talk, and I think we learned a lot today. What struck me from your talk is the level of details that you have done on your two research. You went on, you went to Ethiopia and you tried to merge the gaps in your findings, connecting the individual to household to community levels, and you also have the characteristics of your population, your gender, and also the level of literacy, and you have found out migration that have been the most vulnerable groups. So I think we learn a lot from the way you analyze this complexity, and this is a very, very good example. And also the case study in India, you've shown us how you would collect data where there has been no data before, and this is a very great example of how you would start a research from nothing, right? And you end up with your research ethics in giving the voice to everybody, the women, the illiterates, and so on. And this I think would be something that many of us has forgotten to think about when we're doing a research. So thank you very much. And I think we could have another 20 minutes or so for Q&A. If anyone would like to ask any questions, please raise your hands, or you can just start now. Anyone, please?
Basically, just one aspect. I stopped sharing my screen because I think it's a bit nicer to see you. But if you would have any questions or you want to come back to a slide, of course, feel free to let me know, and I can.
Yeah, Pao Tai, please.
Yep, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation, and I'm quite interested in the case of women and the people who are illiterate in the in Ethiopia. So, as they lack of opportunity to move out or to find a way in order to cope with drought in their area. So, what were the strategies that they try to do in order to satisfy their life or to sustain their life in that condition?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a good question. So typically in this, so one aspect that I did not perhaps mention, which is quite important to understand a little bit this place in the southeast of Ethiopia. So it's quite deprived area. So the poverty rate is very high. So in a way, a lot of households do not have a lot. And but there is one thing called a little bit the green gold, which is called it's a cash crop. Of course, it's always when you need to remember the name that you don't. Chat, sorry. And it's quite common in the Horn of Africa. You have a lot in Somalia also. And this crop is the really main cash crop. So even so that there is also quite the fragmentation of land, and households do not have big land, most of them. They would really make them a little bit living in a precarious manner, because then everything depends a little bit on if it's a good year or not. But then that would be one of the key activity, also involving women in the agricultural. So everybody is it's not just men into this agricultural part. So that's one of the of the key activities.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions?
Yes, can I ask a question? Sorry, I cannot find the where I can press the raising hand. Yeah, I really enjoy your talk, Marion. Thank you very much. I don't have any like specific questions about the work that you've done. I think it's very good and it covers most of the determinants of migration. Yeah, but I just wondering the case of Kursa in Ethiopia. Do you have, when you mentioned about out migration, does that mean from Kursa at least 6 months during the period of 2007 to 2016, right? And do you have any idea, so when they move out, where did they go? Is it in the city in Ethiopia or abroad?
Yeah. Yes, we have the information. Basically, so we have a sort of categories of destination. You have international migration, which is it's less than it's 1.8%. So almost nobody migrate abroad. It's very, very specific. So most of the migrations are internal, and within this internal migration, you could even make another distinction, which unfortunately the variable is not so well coded for the internal division. So it's hard to, I mean, it's not the fact that the code, sorry, it's the, so you have internal in the sense that they go within the country, for example, in another region. So you imagine the capital, like for example, in Addis Ababa, or they really go just in, they stay in close to, so in the same region, in Oromia region. And one of the limitations of this HDSS site is like, so you imagine your, for example, your surface. So the surveillance system is 40 kilometers per 40 kilometers. So you have one household living within the surveillance system. And for example, one of the members migrates within the surveillance system. So it's I don't know if, for example, he changed the village. That will be a very local movement. But then someone doing out migration out of the surveillance system, but just like perhaps 1 kilometer more, it then will be in this category of, so you see this internal migration could cover very, very local or up to the other side of the country. That's why I did not distinguish, I did not use a model per destination, because international migration, they are not enough. I think it's so specific, and internal, basically, I think it's very artificial if we try to limit. So what we could keep in mind is most of the people, they don't migrate far. They go to the next, the closest city, or in another rural places, which is, for example, in a bit more in the highland, so it's a better elevation and less prone to drought. So we are very internal in terms of migration.
And one interesting thing is that the median age of the migrants, for me, I think it's very young, like 20 years old on average, right? Yeah, very interesting. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question.
Okay, do we have any other questions?
Okay, so excuse me, can I please have one small?
Please.
Thank you. So as your refer to the theory about involuntary immobility. So it seems like, I mean, people in this group would like to go out for migration or for work outside, but they have no capability. But in terms of the future, so would they like to find some more capabilities in order to change their ways of life to have an ability to migrate in the future, for example, so they can like borrow the money or lend the money from outside, or they can like find a way so they can invest more in order to gain more and use this money as a part of their capital in order to drive them to go out. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question and comment. I won't be able to talk instead of them. So that's, and I think it's very good you mentioned this, because that also shows the interest and limitation of quantitative work, for example. So I have the data and I can make some hypotheses, but so here with the goal of breaking a little bit this idea that the places which are exposed to really harsh environmental change, you know, people would have to migrate, they would have to leave at some point, it will be unsustainable. Here it's a little bit to say, you know, it's very heterogeneous, and in this place when we have a vicious circle of poverty, people don't have so much kinship ties abroad, for example, or so they don't really have the capacity, the financial resources, but also the social resources to send out migrants somewhere else and so on. So I think it's also on the policy level to alert the fact that some places that with highly vulnerable people, perhaps some aspects should be done to avoid, as you said, to perhaps avoid a humanitarian crisis. If at some point, and at the moment, unfortunately, is also one of the biggest drought in the Horn of Africa, and so the food insecurity is really, really huge, and so it's a little bit exactly showing that immobility. And I think you probably have seen this with Professor Sekta-Polrak. You have a little bit, it shows its two outcomes. The outcome of a good adaptation, you can stay there because you may manage to overcome the difficulties of perhaps of some aspect, but that's also the outcome of absence of adaptation. And I mean, I don't want to have a very gloomy discourse here. Of course, I think in a way we could also rely on the fact that so there's some creativity on the human aspect, and yeah, and there is no determinism. It's not that they completely trapped, and that's why I mentioned the risk of, but that's to really understand what would be the needs of the population, what are the aspirations. What would be absolutely important is to combine this type of work with more qualitative work now, and then to really go there, to go in Kirsa and to make a qualitative surveys to be able to have the real voice of the people, and then to test our hypotheses. What we have seen through the model, what do they mean? How we can combine them with the so some, let's say, real interpretation. So we hopefully will be able to do this in September. I must admit this mixed method part was supposed to be to be done. I mean, we have been trying to go to Ethiopia for the last 2 years, but as you know, international traveling has been highly disrupted by COVID. Plus, unfortunately, Ethiopia has also there was a civil war for all last year, so it's also was also difficult.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was initially wanted to ask about the mixed method, but you already answered. So yeah, I can understand that you need both. Yeah, just to make your research really complete. Actually, you have touched a little bit on machine learning. So would you be able to elaborate a little bit on that and how you could extend your research on with machine learning, please?
I mean, there are perhaps two aspects that that I could imagine, for example, as a follow-up of this this first insight with the event history modeling. So one aspect is to look a little bit more, as I said, machine learning. I'm personally not a big expert of machine learning, or but I've been working with these colleagues, at least this colleague Laurence, who are my mathematician, and that they have in the unit they have been working. I mean, as machine learning is very, very trendy. So what I have understood, and from what I have read also about the recent publication, is this. So said migration process or migration decision process is very, so it's multifactorial, multi-level. But then the thing is, you have a lot of the different variables you could take, the so-called independent variables the problem is they are often a little bit, I mean, they're quite collinear. It's rare that they are fully independent. So that's kind of some aspect that could is not so easy to deal with in more classical so regression models. I think machine learning will give you different. It deals quite well probably with far more variables, far bigger data sets. Also, so when you start to have more than 10,000 units, the coefficients, they tend to be all significant, for example. And so there are different aspects which makes machine learning quite attractive. After, I don't think that there is a magic tool. It's, as we said about data, when you work with your data, sometimes we have they're not so good, there's this aspect. But I think everybody is facing the same type of issues for different reasons. But so I think machine learning will bring some aspect. It could help to understand the influence of the explanatory power of some variables, and that could help to understand what are the role of environmental change. What's the explanatory power of environmental change on mobility? For this, it will be better. I think for some other aspect, perhaps more details, I don't think it is. It is also magical. So one of the key parts would be, and it starts to be done, it's to compare with the same data set, to probably run more traditional models, and try to also apply machine learning and to compare the output, and that's what would be something I would be very interested to do. And the next step also is, I think, as you have seen, typically I used environmental variables, but I use, for example, some rainfall, temperature information, but at the aggregate level. I used some distinction between, so what I have called environmental feature, so where the people live, like in lowland or highland or dryland without irrigation, dryland with irrigation. But we could also think about looking at we could imagine that even at the local level, a village that are located 40 kilometers away from another one with a higher elevation might receive very different precipitation. So I think to use Earth observation information, so to extract environmental variables from satellite imageries, would be quite interesting, and that could also characterize a bit better the environmental dimension that I have used. So that's also could be something good to do.
All right, thank you very much. Is there any other question? But I have one very stupid question.
I'm not sure I would reply to
Let's try this. Okay. So let's say if you were to start a new project similar to the one you have in Ethiopia or in India. If you were to study, let's say, outmigration, do you start from an ethnographic study, or do you start seeking data from, let's say, an institution? You know, how do you do that in the initial stage? How do you decide where to go?
I mean, probably how my training has been, or how my first answer would be, I would little bit more go into the what I could call a top-down approach. I would first try to search for, I think the quantitative part, or let's say the data part, could come at different stage. But one aspect, even so, if I want to do just for example, ethnographic study, which I think it's also probably something that would be a bit challenging for me because I have done it less. I would like to know more. Okay, well, am I able to retrieve some key information to know a little bit where I should go, what kind of community will I face, can I meet? So to try to really understand a bit better, yeah, the places, the people, and I think it's always an iterative process. That's really what I like so much into so-called exploratory data analysis, and also what I've did during my PhD is called abductive method. And abductive method has this part where, in a way, you're not data driven, but you're not completely theoretical driven. It's like you make step by step. You start to think, that would be perhaps interesting to explore this, or this could be a hypothesis in my work. And then the thing is, you search a little bit more data, you learn a bit more, and then you come back to your question, and so on. So I think I've done this a lot, and even like for CARES, I have done it a lot. That's the first research question, and now the research question that you have seen as very different. Also because you get familiar with your data, you understand better what you can do, what you cannot, and sometimes it could also be frustrating because you're like, I would love to know this, but you realize you don't have the materials to question this. But on some other aspect, you realize that you have, perhaps you get more familiar, it's yeah, cool. That should be something that I should investigate. And then that gives you a direction to go.
Okay, thank you. I think we learned a new approach, adaptive method, right? Yeah. Okay. Any other questions from the audience, please?
But I'm impressed that because you are 6 or 7 hours in front of me, right? Yeah. I don't know if I would manage to keep the Viennese students at this time of the day, you know.
It's 9 p.m., 20 past 9.
Yeah. So I'm impressed by how diligent you all are.
Okay. If there is no further questions, then I think we shall bring this to a close. So I'd like to say thank you again to Marion, and she's been really, really wonderful. And I think we learned both the theories and the methods, and also the ethics of doing research. And I think this has been again a wonderful speaking series. Thank you again, and please everybody show her big hands. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much to you, and so Shaya for the invitation, and Liwa to see you all. It was really a pleasure. So have a very good evening now, and hopefully I meet some of you again in reality one day.
Hope to see you too. Thank you very much.